In this video, I would like to discuss the narrative that the West has provoked Russia to attack Ukraine by expanding NATO. In the Western world, this allegation is not the mainstream point of view, but it is still expressed by some influential figures from the academia. One such figure, for example, is Professor John Mearsheimer from Chicago State University. You can also hear it from commentators like Jordan Peterson, who is a clinical psychologist, Jeffrey Sachs, who is an economist. Of course, the loudest propagators of this point of view are the Russian media, Russian government officials. So Mearsheimer and Peterson and Sachs, they are not very original, with all due respect. They simply echo the Kremlin's messages, almost word for word. But all right, my goal is not to make a personal attack on Mearsheimer, Peterson, and Sachs. My goal is to look at these claims through the lens of Realpolitik, which is the school of thought to which John Mearsheimer belongs. Because I think that if you apply the concepts of Realpolitik consistently, once you actually use the axioms of Realpolitik when analyzing the Russia-Ukrainian war, then the entire argument collapses. So let's start from the basics. Realpolitik is based on a few simple premises, such as states seek survival above all else. States act under uncertainty, and therefore the state power is the only tool that they have in order to ensure their own security and stability. So states seek maximal power. All right, now these axioms are self-evident in my view. They're very reasonable. They are not immoral. They are not cynical. They just, I think they correctly describe the political world around us. Now, Mearsheimer's and Kremlin's picture of the Russian-Ukrainian war is more or less this. In 2014, the Western powers organized a coup d'etat in Ukraine, which turned Ukraine into a puppet state in the hands of the West. Now, I do not know what is really meant by the West, because the West is different. The United States is the West, Canada is the West, Germany is the West, Italy is the West, France is the West, and all those Western countries have own interests. But okay, so there is this collective West, which did all these bad things. Now, as the West has turned Ukraine into own puppet, Russia was so concerned about NATO expansion to the east that it had no choice but to start a war on Ukraine. After the people of Crimea voted to join Russia, Russia had nothing to do with it. Crimea became part of the Russian Federation. Then Ukraine started a war against the people of Donbas, in which Russia didn't take part, but which later made Russia start a full-scale invasion against Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. So according to Kremlin propaganda and according to the point of view of John Mearsheimer and Jordan Peterson and Jeffrey Sachs, it is the West who is responsible for the countless human victims caused by that war. While Putin is a rational player, he is a rational political leader. He is a good political leader who cares about the safety and security of his own country. Mr. Mearsheimer if you are listening to this video. And if you find that I am distorting your perspective, misinterpreting your words, then please leave a comment below. I am very much interested in hearing your opinion. All right, now let us entertain these claims for a moment. Suppose Mearsheimer is right. Suppose the 2014 revolution or coup was indeed a Western organized event. What would this imply? This implies that the Western intelligence somehow created a vast clandestine network inside Ukraine with tens of thousands of agents who coordinated their actions across multiple cities, who infiltrated the political structures months before the actual protests started in November 2013. Before the protests, the Western intelligence services were able to organize the logistics. They were able to secretly control communications between the future insurgents, or whatever you call them. And all of this was happening right under the nose of Russia's supposedly all-powerful, omnipotent, omniscience intelligence services. And not just once, twice! Because, according to the same narrative, Western intelligence must have done the exact same thing 10 years before that, in 2004, the Orange Revolution, which prevented Viktor Yanukovych from taking power for the first time. So, the story requires us to believe that Western intelligence successfully executed two massive coups in Ukraine, while Russian intelligence failed to detect either one. If Mearsheimer, Sachs, and Peterson are right, then the unavoidable conclusion is that Russia's intelligence services are catastrophically incompetent. But if the Russian intelligence is catastrophically incompetent, then the West does not need Ukraine as a tool to get to Russia. The West can control Russia directly by infiltrating a lot of own agents into the Russian government, including the Ministry of Defense, including the KGB, not the KGB, the FSB, the secret police, the GRU. And then there is simply no need for the West to carry out a coup d'etat in Ukraine, which is a costly project with unknown results. It was impossible to know the result of the coup beforehand, right? All right. So let's give the three devils their due. Let us assume that the West has indeed organized that coup, and that the Russian intelligence somehow overlooked that coup, and later they had a moment of epiphany, and they finally correctly identified the West as the secret evil genius that tries to move NATO to Russia's western borders. Are Russia's actions then consistent with this picture? Then, after this sudden realization, Russia must have started a massive cleansing of its FSB, GRU, get rid of those senior officers who failed to recognize such a giant secret operation, carried out by their Western colleagues right at the borders of Mother Russia. Internal investigations should have started. People should have lost their jobs, should have been fired, should have been sentenced to years of imprisonment for sabotaging their own duties. Maybe some people would have to fall out of windows, I do not know. But nothing like that happened. Nothing happened. Same people who operated Russian intelligence before 2014, during 2014, are running Russian intelligence services now. Strange, isn't it? The only logical explanation that I see is that the Russian secret services did not do anything wrong. There was no reason to fire anybody. And the Russian political elite knew it. But then it also follows that Ukrainian overthrow of government in 2014 was not organized by the West. Sorry. It's logic. Well, anyway, okay, well, I am digressing. Let us continue pretending that this is not the case, and the massive cleansing did not happen for some reason which are unknown to us, but then Russia's annexation of Crimea contradicts its own narrative, and also Mearsheimer's narrative, and Sachs' narrative. Because, for two reasons. First, Crimea was the most anti-NATO region in Ukraine. Again, most of the people who live in Crimea are Russians, ethnically Russian, and they are most susceptible to this anti-NATO rhetoric, and they are more opposed to NATO expansion and see NATO as a threat more than anybody else in Ukraine. So now what Russia did was, under the pretext of protecting those people, Russia removed those people from being able to vote in Ukrainian elections. Crimean political parties could not influence the Ukrainian policies and politics after annexation of Crimea. Crimean politicians are removed from the Ukrainian parliament, and this made NATO expansion and NATO membership of Ukraine more likely, not less likely. The second reason is that annexation of Crimea, also outside of Crimea, not all Ukrainians in the year 2014 supported the idea of joining NATO. But, and so there was this discussion going on in the country with the pro-NATO part of the society being consistently smaller than anti-NATO part. So it was, I believe, by the polls conducted in 2013, only about 30 to 40% were in favor of NATO membership, 30 or 40% of Ukrainians, whereas 60 to 70% were against. So annexation of Crimea gave Ukraine the most valid of reasons to seek NATO protection. If Russia feared NATO expansion, then it would be logical for Russia to avoid provoking Ukraine. Instead, Russia did the one thing that guaranteed to push Ukraine toward NATO. So, Mearsheimer is wrong when he claims that Ukrainian revolution of 2014 was a coup organized by the West to move NATO closer to Russia's borders. It was only after annexation of Crimea that Russia could start worrying about the potential strengthening of the ties between Ukraine and NATO. This perfectly fits the realpolitical axiom that states seek own security. Ukraine is no exception. Ukraine is also, this axiom applies to Ukraine as to any other state. Ukraine also seeks security above all else. So it is natural for Ukraine to seek NATO membership for own security. Now let's talk about Donbas war. From the standpoint of cynical realpolitik, the Donbas war was strategically useful to Russia as a tool to prevent Ukrainian membership in NATO. Russia gave Ukraine a reason to seek NATO membership by occupying Crimea, annexing Crimea. So now it was only after this point that Russia should have started to worry about the potential NATO membership of Ukraine. So I will never believe that it is illogical to believe that Russia has no part in Donbas war. Russia is the most interesting party in keeping the conflict in Donbas alive for years, for 8 years. Why? Because first, the Donbas war distracted Ukraine from Crimea. When a war is going on in Donbas region, Ukraine could not focus on reversing the annexation. Crimea simply, it is not the first priority for Ukraine. And second, a war in Donbas blocked Ukraine's part to NATO from NATO's perspective, because now by taking Crimea, Crimea did not automatically block NATO membership. It was a problem, but not an unsurmountable one. A divided country, that is, Ukraine without Crimea is a divided country. A divided country can join NATO. The famous example is West Germany, who joined NATO while divided. But Donbas war, it did block NATO membership, because NATO cannot accept a country with an active war going on inside its borders. With this civil war in Donbas, and they put civil war in quotation marks, Ukraine is a liability. It is a source of constant troubles. It is not an asset. So, and since Russia benefited enormously from the Donbas war, claiming that Russia did not participate is strategically absurd. No realist would deny involvement in a conflict that perfectly served Russia's interests. Here is another contradiction in the Russia versus America existential rivalry story. If Russia and the United States were really, truly locked in this zero-sum geopolitical struggle, that is, if Russia saw the United States as an existential enemy, if this rivalry could explain everything that Russia does, then why does Russia sell enriched uranium to the United States of America? And this is not a speculation. This is not a rumor. I didn't make this up. I am quoting none other but President of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin himself, who did say publicly that Russia is the second largest supplier of enriched uranium to the United States, that Russia provides 25% of enriched uranium that United States consumes. So think about that. A quarter of America's enriched uranium imports come from Russia. This uranium can be used to produce nuclear weapons. It's absurd. You are my worst enemy, but let me sell you some bullets. That's stupid. Let us not assume that Vladimir Putin is stupid. He's probably above average intelligence, I think people say. So this is not what civilizational enemies do. This is not what states do when they fear each other's expansion. And it completely contradicts Mearsheimer's framing of a rigid boundary, binary, Cold War style rivalry. Russia's security concerns are in fact imperial ambitions in disguise. Russia does not fear NATO. Russia does not fear that NATO will one day attack Russia. But what Russia does fear is that NATO can block its ability to dominate neighbors. And this is the real reason why Russia is so opposed to NATO expansion. This is why Russia attacked Georgia, who was not a NATO state. This is the reason why Russia attacked Ukraine, not a NATO state. This is the reason why Russia threatens Moldova, again, not a NATO state. But Russia never attacks NATO members. This is imperial logic, not defensive logic. But in spite of all its intellectual weakness, Mearsheimer's narrative still resonates in the West. And this is a little bit of a surprise. I am not sure why there are some people who repeat this strange story after Mearsheimer, but I believe that some people do because this story offers psychological comfort. It gives people an excuse not to support the victim of an aggression. The Russia-Ukraine war is something like a David versus Goliath war. Russia, in view of its size, its resources, its importance for the world economy, seems more likely to win. And when people see a conflict where one side looks overwhelmingly stronger, they instinctively think it's safer not to get involved. It's the same psychology as witnessing an armed robbery. People walk away because it feels safer to walk away. They think this won't happen to me. And it is this audience that Mearsheimer is appealing to. We are separated from Russia by this beautiful big ocean. We won't get affected. We do not need to be involved. But this is an illusion. The situation already happened once in the late 1930s, when the real politicians like John Mearsheimer thought it was safer to give Hitler Austria than to give Hitler the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, then to give Hitler the rest of Czechoslovakia, and then Hitler invaded Poland. And then the Second World War began. Oh, by the way, Hitler was annexing Sudetenland, Austria, under the pretext of protecting the German-speaking population of those regions, just like Putin is doing nothing but protecting the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine. Millions died in the Second World War as a result of this Realpolitik. And history may repeat itself. Because today it is Ukraine. Tomorrow it will be the Baltic states. The day after tomorrow it will be Poland. Why not? And eventually we are dragged into World War III, and we do not want that to happen. So, supporting Ukraine is not only it is moral, but it is also self-interest. Because Realpolitik, when applied correctly, explains exactly why Russia invaded Ukraine and why the West must support Ukraine now. And therefore I urge you to support Ukraine's defense, self-defense. The only way to do that is by donating to the Ukrainian armed forces, directly to the units which are in the front lines. My favorite ones are Magyar Birds, the most efficient, the most courageous people there are, including the rest of the Ukrainian armed forces, but I love Magyar Birds. So the link is in the description to this video. Do this for the sake of your own children, who will not have to go to the front lines of World War III. Thank you for watching.